Hello and welcome to Louis Philippe in Pursuit of Excellence. My guest today is a Padma awardee. He is a true legend who has changed the face of India's banking sector. K.V Kamath. K.V, good to see you. It's been a while. I remember coming to this beautiful office of yours to visit with you. What was it, 5-6 years ago maybe?
Yes, indeed.
I very rarely, in India particularly, get to look up at people,
We can see eye to eye.
Yeah, exactly. Did you ever think as you were growing up that maybe sport should be your profession?
Well, I used to play tennis, what you played, but I wasn't, anywhere near as good as you. So I took that to heart and said I may be better off putting some more effort in studies.
Something else. When you were growing up, you were from Bangalore originally and ended up doing an engineering degree. Did you have maybe some thought process as to which direction you really wanted to go?
Coming from that generation, your parents molded your mind. My parents always wanted for me to study, for both of us, my brother and I, to study, and B, to be in family business. My dad had a small Bangalore roofing tile factory, and he expected me to run that going forward. So I did my engineering, and in those days I was an entrepreneur. I used to actually take 3 hours off midday and drive down to the factory, look after it. So 4 years I did that. And then going on to the Indian Institute of Management to do my management studies, I think pushed me off track.
But you grew up in an entrepreneurial environment. Is that something that you enjoyed at the time?
I think at that point of time, you also saw the challenges that an entrepreneurial environment brought to a family. So, in the sense that things were just happening in India, it was difficult being an entrepreneur. And you could see what effort was required to make it work. So I think that also molded me later on in terms of how I looked at business. And when I decided to get to banking, that played a foundational role in my approach to a business.
But when you went into a college and you were graduating to college and all of that, did you have the financial sector in mind?
Not at all.
No.
I didn't have it in mind indeed when I did my engineering. When I went to business school, finance was I loved the subject. So I took all available courses in finance. And you had to do one more subject. So I took all available courses in marketing. So I had both, in a way, specializations with me when I graduated. But I loved finance. It so happened that one of my professors sent across my resume to this institution. And I think that's how I wandered in here, as it were.
You see, at that point in time, how did your parents feel about it? How did Dad feel about the fact that you're not going to take over the business?
My dad, I think, felt a bit let down, as it were, because he had banged on me to come back. But then he had my brother as a fallback. My brother is 7 years younger to me. So he indeed then ran that business and continues to run it with his children today.
Now, obviously, the banking sector at the time when you joined is so much different than it is today. What were the challenges at that particular time?
Actually, Vijay, it was a very enjoyable time. I think it was a huge learning curve for me. I had a great teacher. My first boss, a gentleman called S.S. Nadkarni, who later on became chairman of ICICI, chairman of IDBI, chairman of SEBI. One of the smartest brains that I have seen. And it was a pleasure learning under him. So I would think the first 4 or 5 years went in learning and then growing. So I first learned and then grew. So I was enjoying myself all the time.
But as you joined this incredible institution, ICICI Bank at the time, the moving from one division to the other, was it a conscious move? Was it something that you felt that you had to learn all aspects of what the bank offered?
Well, we were, a couple of us were the first lot of management trainees that this institution took on board. They said that they would rotate us from function to function to multi-skill ourselves. I think multi-skilling is always good. And we have later on looked at leaders who could be multi-skilled in their career as they grow up. So I think that it was a learning curve in the initial period. But thereafter, there was a whole lot of learning on the job. And that's what I think this institution does. It allows you to learn on the job. And I think that's what differentiates ICICI from many other institutions.
But at the same time, what practical difficulties? I mean, for example, what you study in academics and schooling and banking and so on and so forth, the financial sector for that matter, is not quite practical experience of being on the job.
I entirely agree. I think you very quickly on day one realize that you are completely inadequate in terms of what your degree has prepared you for. Because theory as applied to practice, there's a whole lot of, I would say, different nuances. So you have to learn those nuances. And I remember even something very simple as how do you write out an appraisal for a project proposal. I very quickly found that the vocabulary set was very limited, and you really could not afford to stray out of that vocabulary set. Even to get the first paragraph right, it took me maybe 4 rewrites first time round to get it perfectly right, as it were. And I'm not sure it was perfectly right even then. So it was a vast gap between theory and practice, and you had to bridge it as you went along.
17, 18 years you've been at ICICI. I mean, how did you feel your movement within the company, as the head of the company, actually be able to transform this bank?
I think coming back was a very exciting time. Mr. Wagul asked me one day, I was in Jakarta, and they called me up and said, can I meet you in Singapore? So I said, fine, I'll come over for the weekend. I went across there, and he basically popped a question. He said, would you like to come back and take over after me? This was 95, and I said yes, without all in the space of maybe 5 minutes. I said yes. When I came back, I realized that India had changed dramatically. In 8 years, a whole lot of transformation had happened. So you came back to an India, at least Indian business, which was trying to be globalized, a market-facing economy, not a closed economy, and all sorts of challenge that my customers were facing. So this was the India that I came back to. The warm comfort was that you had a core of talent in ICICI. And this, Mr. Wagul, Mr. Narkani's successor, had made sure that we had a pipeline of talent recruited from the best available places. And that core of talent was available to actually build ICICI as was needed for that point in time.
When you came back into ICICI Bank, what was your thought process? How were you able to sort of face the challenges, the new challenges, if it may be?
A very interesting question. I think one of the first thoughts that came to my mind was that if India is changing, maybe we need to change also. Not that we have to change, but we need to look at whether there is opportunity for us to change and do something different, bigger. And Mr. Wagul was somebody who always encouraged new thoughts and new ideas. So I knew that I would have a very strong ally in doing this. Mr. Wagul had taken over as non-executive chairman of the board. So one thought that came across the mind was that from being a development bank or a project finance company, could we look at being what broadly can be called a universal bank? That is having commercial banking, private banking, retail banking, of course, project finance, maybe an insurance wing, doing general insurance, life insurance. So providing a wide variety of financial services, or possibly all financial services which a bank could be permitted to do. And actually that found, I would say, acceptance and, at the board level. There was huge excitement in the organization that we could go and do all these things, and we had a fairly free hand to do it. The challenge was that nobody in the system, that is the financial system in the country, believed A, it was necessary, and B, it could be done. But sometimes that is the best position to be in, when everybody is skeptical.
So, I had a long stint at ICICI Bank, and then you decided it was time to move on. You moved on to the ADB, Asian Development Bank. Tell us about that move. What made you move?
So initially I went basically to play investing, not to learn as much as trade investing. But what I found is the exposure to various Asian countries shaped a whole lot of my mind, as it were, and prepared me to come back, making me probably a much better person. You could see what change happened when I would say, country went out of emerging status to almost a developed status. What were the changes that were happening? And these became lessons when you came back. For example, I found that when per capita incomes in a country go beyond $500 per capita, people's aspirations change. They want a home, they want things to put in the home, they want transportation goods, maybe a mall or two starts happening, roads get improved. And we weren't there in 98, 99, but I thought by 2003, 2004, India would be there. And if you were going to be in these markets, so that is home finance, cars, and credit cards and such, you needed to start work 4-5 years earlier. And that came from looking at things across Southeast Asia. And it did happen to be the right call in India, because by 2003 or 2004, we crossed $500 per capita income. And as a nation, by 2008, we crossed $1,000. And that really caused the upswing in the middle class in India. And when you look back, less than 10 years that this transformation started. And we were prepared for it. So the ADB experience suddenly started becoming a hugely value add in terms of what we could do later.
But even little things in India, we always feel credit cards, for example. People are still not quite comfortable using a credit card. They'd rather use cash. Or my parents' generation always rather use cash. Today, you pull out a credit card, Dad would always look at you saying, where's your money? So was that something that you'll have to overcome here?
That was a huge challenge. Yes. In fact, a whole lot of tales around that, even much more simpler things. We were trying to roll out ATMs in around 2000. We were rolling out ATMs because we just had, I think, about 100 branches, maybe 50 ATMs. There are totally 100 ATMs in the country. And the bank, which at that time was a subsidiary of the parent, did not believe in the ATM at all. They said, no Indian will use the ATM. Exactly. They use the credit card. And, it was like a struggle for me to say that, look, this is the future. This is going to change the way the customer is going to interact. It was only in 2001 or so, we said we will roll out 1,000 ATMs in 1 year. And there were only about 100 ATMs. And nobody believed that it could, it would be actually a machine which would be used by people. But the rest is history, as they say. I think we learn very quickly as Indians, and I realized that convenience is king. So if you gave them the ATM that was convenient, customer was happy. You gave them any other instrument. So today, you give them internet access, initially on a desktop, very happy. You give them a call center, you're happy. And now, an app and your mobile phone or your device becomes your connection point. 200 million people, as you speak, on the net using a handheld device. I think we are set for change.
So please hold that thought. We're going to take a short break. I'm talking to K.V Kamath of ICICI Bank. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Louis Philippe in Pursuit of Excellence. I'm in conversation with K.V Kamath of the ICICI Bank. K.V, all your years at this wonderful institution, if you had to name one or two things that were the turning points in your career here, how would you explain them?
I think the first turning point really was maybe 1980 or so, when Mr. Narkani asked me to become his executive assistant, because that took my learning to a different level. Second one was the ADB experience. So it started off for a different purpose. It educated me a lot and gave me the tools to come back. The third changing point was, I would say, exercising leadership after coming back to ICICI. 96, 97, getting the structure right, getting the people in place, getting the capital right, and building the foundation for growth. Thereafter, there have been one or two, which is each time we took a different path, started looking at a new business, an inflection point. I think you felt that you now are taking the organization into a different path.
Within 3 years, after 3 years of being in the bank, ICICI, you then went on New York Stock Exchange. And it seems to me in conversation that you're a constant observer of change, that you enjoy the challenges of starting to move the institution in different directions. Was that right?
Absolutely. In fact, there are several presentations that I have done and talks that I have given. The caption headline is what you said, the challenge of change. I'm sure you've not seen this, but you could probably sense that that's what I love to do. Because everything was evolving. At each stage, you have to understand how you could manage evolution and change, and of course, benefit from it.
So ICICI obviously was the major part of your life as you transformed this institution, and then you went for a while with the Infosys family. How different was that, and what kind of a challenge was that?
See, Infosys, again, Murthy, I also look at as a mentor because he was on our board in the late 90s. And I think a whole lot of how to run a professional organization I learned from him. So it was a hugely interesting exercise. Again, at the same time, a learning experience.
But as you look back at your career when you first started in college and university and so on, and turned down your father's rule for you to be an entrepreneur in the business, and then going into the banking sector, obviously there's been a great transformation both in your life as well as the country and the banking industry. What challenges do you see today that the industry faces as we move forward for the next decade?
I think, frankly, Indian industry ought to be at the same sort of point that we were in 95, in the sense that there was policy change. As a consequence of that, certain things happened. There's now a relook at policy, but I'm sure it will be clarified in 2014 or 2015, giving Indian industry a new momentum, as it were. And if Indian industry gets that momentum, I'm reasonably sure it will, then the financial services industry, actually is a good cheerleader for business, whether it is large industry, retail, or so the financial services industry should grow.
How would you term excellence?
I think the start point is really your understanding of opportunity and where are the boundary conditions. So you have to dream that opportunity is there, the boundary conditions can always be pushed back, and as what people call blue sky strategy. It's blue out there and you have got opportunity. And indeed, that's what's happening today in a wide variety of ways. And if your organization can think in that context and you provide the leadership to make that happen, I think you achieve. So to me, I think a young person today should look at that opportunity that technology provides to do things different and do things differently, as it were. And I'm sure that will lead to success. And I'm stressing, do things different, do things differently. That is, don't do things necessarily what your parents did or your grandparents did. It's a new time, it's a new place. Leverage things around you. If that's true at the individual level, I think it's also true at the organization, at the company level. And if you fail, we will fail because we fail to see this opportunity, this change. I think that is the huge excitement of going to office every day today, seeing things happen around you, and trying to see how you can make that happen.
K.V, thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
wonderful talking to you.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you so much. All the best.
You can also watch this episode online at louisphilippe.com.